So the attacks from the media have already started against Bernie Sanders. So I've got a few articles here, and this one's from Teen Vogue. But what I think you'll start to see this ramp up. So this article here is basically why this person no longer supports Bernie. So it's got here, when Bernie Sanders entered the presidential race, I became a supporter of his and campaigned almost immediately. And the meat and potatoes of the articles here. But a lot has changed since 2016, much of which has made me grow increasingly remorseful for my active participation in his campaign. In the past 4 years, Sanders' words and actions have shown me time and time again that he is more concerned with boosting his image as a white savior figure of social justice than actually uplifting the voices of community he so directly pretends to represent. In fact, a New York Times article recently described how his campaign, the one I volunteered to support, initially focused on predominantly white states and failed to gain momentum with black voters in southern states, while black staff members told the Times that they faced a plethora of microaggressions from white campaign leaders. And it goes on to say here, and the announcement that Sanders will be running for president again in 2020 is just another reminder of how the independent senator is dead set on taking up spaces that simply do not belong to him. This is a quote from Bernie Sanders. We've got to look at candidates, not by the color of their skin, not by their sexual orientation or their gender, and not by their age, the senator told Vermont Public Radio in February 19th interview following his presidential bid announcement. I mean, I think we have to try to move us forward as a non-discriminatory society which looks at people based on their abilities, based on what they stand for. And the person writing the article goes on to say, I found this troubling. Sanders implied that he has faced discrimination as a white man in the United States, while suggesting we shouldn't consider a candidate's identity when choosing who to vote for. This, to me, feels like the equivalent of him telling everyone who is not straight, white, cisgender male that we shouldn't care about seeing ourselves represented in our government. Now, that's quite a big stretch to go from the quote there of basically saying you shouldn't care about the color of someone's skin, you shouldn't care about their sexual identity or their gender or their age. You should basically judge them on what they're saying. But okay, I don't see it. It then goes on to talk about his some of his stuff that he's voted on in the past, some stuff to do with Israel, stuff like that. And then says, and when it comes to gender and race, his lack of solidarity speaks volumes. And here it says, from failing to denounce some of his supporters' racist and sexist language, to saying that white people who felt uncomfortable voting for black candidates Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum in the 2018 midterms are not necessarily racist. So let's look at that quote a little bit deeper. It says, so this is a quote from obviously Bernie Sanders, I think you know that there are a lot of white folks out there who are not necessarily racist, who felt uncomfortable for the first time in their lives about whether or not they wanted to vote for an African American. And then he goes on to say, I think next time around, by the way, it'll be a lot easier for them to do that. So, well, he's kind of just describing the truth. I mean, he can't really help it. If people have noticed that maybe if it's because if it's a dramatic change or not, or if it's something different to the norm, that they don't really take to it. And usually it takes a few times, like he does say later on, I think next time around it'll be a lot easier for them to do that. That's not Bernie's fault. Bernie isn't, he's just describing what is happening. So I don't really see that as Bernie Sanders being racist, or, as they said, flexing his privilege. And it can be name recognition as well. I mean, if you've got a brand new candidate who is the African American running and no one's ever heard of him before, it usually does take a second or a third go, because then you get. They then go on to quote Brother B, where he says, Bernie's democratic socialism is still settler colonialism. It still advances colonialism in America and abroad. I don't really know what to make of that tweet, to be honest. But here's another one that they highlighted. I have to laugh at how many of y'all actually believe that a privileged, straight, white, cisgendered man is going to liberate us. When in the history of ever has that happened? Question mark, question mark. And we've got another article here by Teen Vogue as well, pretty much talking about the same thing. And that goes on to say, there are concerns about whether a white man, who would be the oldest presidential candidate in history, can speak to the diverse base of Democratic voters, particularly black communities that have been central to Democrat success. Those concerns were bolstered in part of a New York Times story breaking down how Sanders failed to appeal to black voters in southern states. But we've got this little information here, and he has put on where he gets his information from. And it's quite interesting. It's pretty much the opposite of what they say. So his net favorability by race is -8 to whites, 31% black. So black is his. They're his. They're 31%. They're in the majority compared to 6% by Hispanic and other. I guess it could be anything. Obviously, it's a whole mix, but who knows exactly which percentage is up and down. Then it goes on down there. Bernie Sanders has a higher net favorabilities than any other candidate among black adults. Part of that has been driven by the high name recognition. But even if you adjust for that, Sanders remains on top. So you've got Bernie, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. Now, these two are black. So you've got two black candidates and Bernie Sanders, 31%. Which the other articles are saying whether or not a white male can do this, whether or not a white male can represent the base. Well, Kamala Harris is a woman and black, Cory, black man, they seem to be losing out against Bernie Sanders. So you've also got favorability with Hispanic voters. Bernie Sanders is actually 6% compared to everyone else. You've then also got candidate favorability with voters of other races, so not white, black, or Hispanic, so that don't make up the majorities. Once again, Bernie Sanders, 18%. Everyone is quite a bit lower. Now, with white voters, Bernie is actually down at -8 compared to the others. He's coming in third last. So when he does campaign in wider areas, well, it kind of makes sense to a certain degree. I can see his logic there of why he would want to do that. But these kinds of facts seem to go against what the mainstream media seems to be saying about Bernie Sanders. And there's this article here: which 2020 Democrats already have a fan base and which don't. The article doesn't really talk about Bernie Sanders that much, but in all the charts, boom, Bernie right at the top. And you've got all the numbers here, and you've got Bernie Sanders. 88, 52 plus 56, difference -3. So that puts him at the top and puts him in a pretty good position. You've also got this article here from the New York Times. Can he do better in 2020? Well, it looks like he's doing better than everyone else. So we'll have to see. I think from now till the primaries and all through there, you'll start to see this ramped up. I think this is the attack that the mainstream media will go with. I think that's, yeah, it's what they've chosen to do. They've chosen to continuously attack him with the black vote, maybe to get him to focus maybe more on the black vote, win a bit less of the white vote. It may cost him votes in the long run. I guess you'll have to see in the future whether it works or not. But expect to see more of it.